As I stood at the altar, watching my own wedding ceremony devolve into chaos, I realized I wasn't the only one hiding secrets behind a mask of perfect happiness. I'd spent years catering to my mother-in-law's every whim, from her outrageous fashion sense to her unrelenting need for attention. She'd convinced my husband that I was the problem, not her, and that I needed to change to make their relationship work. I tried, I really had, but it was a losing battle. The final straw was when she convinced my husband to give her a huge gift, a diamond-encrusted necklace that he'd bought me as a wedding gift, and then proceeded to use it to bribe the caterer to give us a cheaper menu. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. But as I watched the chaos unfold, the caterer storming out, the music system crashing, the guests arguing, I saw my mother-in-law standing tall, a smile plastered on her face, like she was enjoying the destruction she'd caused. And I realized that this was my chance to take back control. I snuck into the back room, where I knew my mother-in-law was hiding the champagne and canapes, and I sabotaged the wedding cake, making it collapse in front of everyone. The look on my mother-in-law's face was priceless: shock, followed by anger, followed by a sly, triumphant smile. But as I stood there, feeling like I'd finally exacted my revenge, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. The mother-in-law's eyes locked onto mine, and for an instant, I saw a glimmer of something ancient and sinister, a spark that seemed to ignite a fire within her, as she mouthed a single, chilling word: mine. As I stood there, frozen in shock, the mother-in-law's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, sending a shiver down my spine. The spark of malevolence had ignited, and I knew I'd underestimated her at my own peril. I tried to process what I was seeing, but it was like trying to grasp a handful of sand. The more I squeezed, the more it slipped away. The air around us grew thick with tension, like a physical presence that pressed against my skin. I felt a bead of sweat trickle down my forehead, and my heart began to pound in my chest. I knew I had to get out of there, but my legs seemed rooted to the spot. My gaze locked onto the mother-in-law's face, searching for any sign of what she was thinking, feeling. Her expression was a mask, but I could sense the calculation behind her eyes. She was weighing her options, considering her next move. And I knew I was the one she was considering. A faint smile played on her lips, and I felt a surge of anger. How dare she think she could toy with me like this? I was the one who had been humiliated, degraded, and disrespected. I was the one who had been kept in the dark, manipulated, and used. As I stood there, my anger boiling over, I became aware of a faint sound coming from the hallway. It was the soft click of heels, the rustle of fabric, and the soft murmur of a voice. My mother-in-law's voice. She took another step, her eyes never leaving mine, and I felt the floor beneath my feet give a slight tilt as if the very foundations of reality were shifting to accommodate her presence. The sound of her voice grew louder, a low, husky whisper that sent a shiver down my spine as she spoke a single, chilling word: mine. Her eyes locked onto mine, a piercing intensity that made my skin crawl. I felt my mind reel as I tried to process the implications of her words. Mine. The possessive tone sent a shiver down my spine, a cold dread creeping up my neck. My husband, oblivious to the storm brewing around us, smiled and stepped forward, his arm wrapping around my waist. "Hey, love, what's going on?" He seemed to be asking me, but his gaze was on my mother-in-law, his eyes filled with a mixture of amusement and deference. My mother-in-law's gaze flicked to my husband, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. "I think we need to discuss the guest list for the wedding," she said, her voice dripping with a condescension that made my blood boil. I felt a surge of anger, my desire to lash out at her simmering just below the surface. But I knew better than to let my emotions get the better of me. Not yet, at least. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. "We've already finalized the list," I said, trying to keep my tone even. My mother-in-law's gaze snapped back to me, a flash of annoyance crossing her face. "I don't think that's true," she said, her voice dripping with skepticism. "I distinctly remember you saying you'd invited all of our mutual friends." My heart sank, a cold dread creeping up my spine. How had she known? As she spoke, my mother-in-law's eyes seemed to gleam with a sinister understanding, her smile twisting into a calculated smirk. As my mother-in-law's words hung in the air, my husband's eyes locked onto hers, a look of horror dawning on his face, and I saw his hand tighten around my waist, his grip almost bruising, before he spoke a single, chilling word, "Who?" She felt her husband's grip tighten around her waist, the pressure threatening to cut off her air supply. The room seemed to fade away, leaving only the two of them, their faces inches apart. The air was heavy with unspoken accusations, each word hanging in the air like a challenge. "My sister," my mother-in-law said, her voice low and smooth, "has a lot to say about you." My husband's eyes never left his mother's face, his jaw clenched in a mixture of anger and shame. I felt a wave of nausea wash over me, my mind racing with possibilities. Who was my sister? What had she done? "My sister has been hurt by you," my mother-in-law continued, her words dripping with venom. "And she's not afraid to speak out." The room seemed to spin around me, my vision blurring at the edges. I stumbled backward, my hand grasping for something to hold onto, but there was nothing. The wall, the couch, even the chair, it was all just out of reach. My husband's grip on my waist tightened again, this time so hard I thought he might squeeze the life out of me. "Who is she?" he demanded, his voice low and menacing. My mother-in-law's smile grew wider, her eyes glinting with triumph. "I'll tell you," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "But first, you need to tell her." The words hung in the air, a challenge, a threat, a promise of something sinister. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of the situation. As my mother-in-law's eyes locked onto mine, I felt a jolt of recognition, and my husband's grip on my waist faltered, his fingers wrapping around my wrist like a vice, his voice barely above a whisper, "You're her sister." My mind was racing, trying to process the revelation that my husband's mother was my long-lost sister. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut, my breath knocked out of me. My husband's grip on my wrist tightened, his eyes darting towards my mother, who was watching us with an unnerving intensity. I could feel her eyes on me, like a weight, making my skin crawl. My husband's voice was barely audible, but his words were like a slap in the face. "We need to talk to your mom about this." I nodded, my heart heavy with foreboding. We walked towards my mother, who was sitting in the corner of the room, a look of calmness on her face that made my blood boil. As we approached her, she looked up, a hint of a smile on her lips. "Ah, darling, I see you've met my sister." Her tone was dripping with condescension, making me feel like an inferior being. I forced a smile, trying to play along, but inside, I was seething. My husband's voice cut through the tension. "We need to talk about what's going on between you and my mom." My mother's expression changed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Oh, you mean the little white lie I told?" Her voice was laced with sarcasm, making my anger boil over. My mother stood up, her movements fluid and calculated. As she walked towards me, my mother's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something that looked almost like recognition, before her mask of calmness slipped back into place, and she whispered, "The truth is, you're not just my daughter, you're my only heir." My mother's eyes locked onto mine, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something that looked almost like recognition, before her mask of calmness slipped back into place. Her voice dropped to a whisper, the words hanging in the air like a challenge. "The truth is, you're not just my daughter, you're my only heir." I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine as I realized what she was saying. She wasn't just upset with me, she was trying to manipulate me into taking over the family business. I took a step back, my mind racing with the implications. I had always thought my father was the one in charge, but now I was starting to realize that I was the one who had been groomed for the role all along. My mother's eyes seemed to bore into my soul, as if daring me to disagree with her. I felt a surge of anger and resentment, but I knew I had to keep my cool. I couldn't afford to show my hand just yet. "I see," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My mother's smile was like a knife cutting through the air, and I knew I was walking into a trap. She began to pace back and forth in front of me, her words spilling out in a rush. "You're the only one who can save the business, who can keep it afloat. And I'm the only one who knows the secrets, the ones that could bring it all crashing down." She stopped in front of me, her eyes glinting with a malevolent light. My mother's smile faltered, her eyes darting frantically to the clock on the wall. Before she spoke in a voice that was almost a whisper, "The power transfer is set to happen in exactly 3 minutes, and I'm afraid you'll be left with no choice but to claim what's rightfully yours or die trying." I watched in frozen horror as my mother's smile twisted further, her eyes burning with a fierce determination. The clock on the wall ticked away, the seconds crawling by at a glacial pace. My mind reeled with the impossible implications of her words. What secrets could she possibly want to reveal? And what did she mean by die trying? A faint shiver ran down my spine as I realized the true nature of the power transfer. It wasn't just about the business, it was about my own life. I was the only one who knew the truth about my father's dealings, the ones that had brought our company to the brink of collapse. And now, my mother was demanding that I take over, that I accept the mantle of responsibility and save the business, or else. I felt a surge of rage, but it was quickly tempered by fear. I knew what my mother was capable of, the lengths she would go to protect herself and her own interests. I had to tread carefully, but I also knew I couldn't back down. Not now, not when everything was on the line. I took a deep breath and stood up, my eyes locked on my mother's. "I'll do it," I spat, trying to keep the venom out of my voice. "I'll take over the business and save it, but I'll do it on my own terms, not yours." My mother's expression didn't change, but I could sense a flicker of surprise behind her eyes. And then, in a move that sent my heart racing, she smiled, a cold, calculating smile, and said, "I think you'll find that your terms are no longer an option."